In the early 1950s, a group of horsemen appeared in the lush Srinagar valley of Kashmir in India. They were unlike anyone the locals had seen. Their faces, clothes, and the way they rode their horses all told of a world far away from this one. They were Kazakh nomads, survivors of a long and punishing journey from the far west of China. Their story began in the windswept steppes of Xinjiang, a vast region of deserts and mountains where their people had lived for centuries. They moved with the seasons, slept in felt yurts, and measured wealth in horses. For them, freedom was not just a way of life, it was who they were. But in 1949, everything changed. The Chinese Communist Party took control of Xinjiang and began enforcing policies that cut deep into the Kazakh life. Private herds would be taken into collective farms, Islamic worship and all traditions were restricted, tribal authority was replaced by communist administration. Travel between pastures was suddenly regulated, making it almost impossible for families to follow the grass as they always had. Leaders who resisted faced arrest or execution. That winter, Kazakh clan chiefs gathered in Barkol in the eastern Tian Shan mountains. For months they had talks with the new communist authorities demanding the right to worship, to keep their customs and move with their herds as the seasons required. The government, worried about a united Kazakh front, blocked their efforts and tightened control. When the talks collapsed, the Kazakhs were left with only two choices: stay and lose everything, or leave and risk everything. In the spring of 1950, just months after those talks, thousands of families left their pastures. They drove their sheep, goats, yaks, and horses toward the high passes of the Himalayas. The journey was merciless. The cold could kill in hours. Wells were frozen solid, so water often came only from chunks of ice chipped away and melted over small fires. Some horses were so starved that riders trained them to eat meat just to survive. Snowstorms swallowed the trails. More than once, they had lost their way entirely. At night, the camps lay quiet except for the huff of horses and the faint crackle of dung fires. Above them, the sky burned with so many stars it seemed close enough to touch. By the time they reached the Indian border, only 350 people were left. In 1951, the refugees came through Ladakh, a remote high-altitude region in the far north of India, and descended into Srinagar, the largest city in the Kashmir Valley. The Kashmiri authorities sheltered them in old caravanserais by the Jhelum River. These were stone courtyards once used by Central Asian traders, with arched chambers opening onto a central square where merchants had tethered their animals and traded goods. For the first time in years, the Kazakhs could rest, but they did not lose their old ways. When summer came, they rode to the high pastures, chasing cool air and green grass. In the mountains, life almost felt whole again. Snow peaks rose over clear streams and forests of fir and juniper. The smell of crushed grass mixed with cooking smoke, and from the hills came the soft chime of animal bells. It was during these years that an American writer and photographer, Milton J. Clark, came to live among these Kazakh refugees. He had first learned about them while studying Central Asian cultures at Harvard, and he traveled to Kashmir to see them for himself. Much of what we know about their time in Kashmir comes from his notes and photographs. One day, looking over the meadows, Kalibek, one of the Kazakh tribal leaders, told Clark, "It looks like our pastures in the Tian Shan, back home." Hospitality was their heartbeat. Guests stepped into richly decorated yurts with red and blue rugs underfoot, saddles neatly stacked by the entrance, and silver ornamented bridles hanging onto the walls. Tea rich with cream was poured into glass bowls, sometimes with a nub of butter melting into the surface. Kumis, the fermented mare's milk they loved, was rare in Kashmir, but honored guests might be served roasted sheep's head with the choicest cuts placed in front of them. On rainy days, the smoky warmth of the yurt pulled people together. Young men in silk robes and soft boots laughed by the fire, tearing chunks of steaming meat. Women poured tea while talk drifted to the homeland, to battles fought and to friends lost. Some of those battles had been fought by women. In Srinagar, Mulia, Kalibek's wife, told Clark about a day back in China before they escaped. Kalibek and his men were away, fighting communist troops outside their village. Suddenly, soldiers appeared below the village, advancing fast. Women scrambled for their horses, clutching their children. Mulia was the last to mount. Her horse panicked and nearly threw her. A bullet grazed the horse's leg, and the animal reared in pain. 4 bullets tore through her clothes. "By God's grace, my horse bolted the wrong way, and I led my pursuers into the mountains," she said. On the way, she met a young shepherd named Suleiman. She told him what happened, and they took the shortest path back to the village. Knowing the enemy would return to loot the houses, they armed themselves with 2 rifles and hid. When the soldiers came, Süleyman fired first, startling them. While he worked 1 rifle, Mulia fired the other. For 5 hours they held the village until Kalibek and the men rode back and drove the attackers away. "My husband praised me for saving the village. I will never forget that day," she said. Not all their memories were of war. Some belonged to the realm of the mysterious. One day, Nurgojai Batır, one of their most respected shaman warriors, performed an exorcism on a boy believed to be possessed. Beating his dombra, a long-necked lute from the Central Asian steppe, he called out, "I call the blue wolf, come on, come on." He danced in a trance, swung an axe, and bit down on hot iron until at last he collapsed. The crowd believed the spirit had left the boy. The smell of scorched metal and juniper smoke hung in the air. Most Kazakhs were Muslim, but moments like this showed how traces of their ancient steppe spirituality still lived alongside their Islamic faith. Even in exile, those old beliefs had not disappeared. Life in Kashmir moved on. Games, horse races, and wrestling matches kept their spirit alive, a reminder that even far from the steppe, they were still Kazakh. But Kashmir was not the steppe. The grazing lands were few and belonged to local herders, making it hard for the Kazakhs to roam freely with their animals. Life in the city replaced their horses with crowded streets and stone courtyards. The rhythm was slower, enclosed, and far from the endless horizons they had once known. Word of their situation eventually reached Türkiye, a country that shared linguistic, historical, and cultural ties with the Kazakhs. Turkish officials learned about them through journalists, diplomats, and Central Asian emigre networks. Their story of endurance and their need for a permanent home resonated deeply in Ankara. In 1952, Türkiye formally offered them resettlement on the Anatolian Plateau, a land of wide grasslands and familiar seasons. The journey was long. They traveled in groups, first by caravan and truck to India's ports, then by ship through the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean, before finally stepping ashore in a country that welcomed them as kin. 200 Kazakhs left Kashmir that winter, more followed, and by 1954, almost all had gone. The farewells in Kashmir were long and heavy. People visited each home, eating and drinking together one last time. They served rice, mutton soup, fried bread, and small triangular dumplings with tea poured again and again. Rings and coins were exchanged as tokens of memory. The clink of silver in a friend's palm marked promises they knew they would never keep, to meet again somewhere out on the grasslands. Clark, who had lived among them for a year, remembered the final words of one Kazakh elder: "Those who shed the blood of the Kazakh people will regret it for many years to come." Over decades, time has erased their footprints from the valley. Today in Kashmir, few remember the Turkic riders who had arrived more than 70 years ago. But in old photographs and in the songs of their descendants, the Kazakh nomads of the Kashmir Valley still ride, a people who crossed half of Asia for freedom and refused to surrender who they were. Today, the descendants of these Kazakhs live in several villages across central and western Türkiye, with others making their homes in Istanbul. In rural areas, many still keep their heritage alive, wearing traditional Kazakh clothing, passing down old songs, and keeping the art of horse riding at the heart of their community life. Their journey from the steppes of Xinjiang to the valleys of Kashmir and finally to the plains of Anatolia is still remembered with pride, as a path their families walk to protect their way of life. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and see you soon.